get the feeling that Marantz hates powered speakers and would like them to go away altogether, and their new Stereo 70 may just prove my theory. Don't believe me? Keep watching. If you put any stock into sales figures, the most popular powered smart speakers from Klipsch, KEF, ELAC, and others, they all have three things in common: HDMI, built-in DACs, and a phono preamp, challenging the tried and true hi-fi systems of old for your spending dollars. While we're likely to see even more companies jump aboard the powered smart speaker train, Marantz has decided to go in a different direction, packing all of the smart functionality into a single standalone device while leaving your choice in speakers up to you. Compared to the latest line of powered speakers from Klipsch, I'm talking about the 7s and the 9s, or the KEF LS50 wireless 2s, the Stereo 70 plus a pair of speakers of your choosing could save you money while increasing your flexibility tenfold. But before we dive into the latest passive versus powered debate, here's what you need to know about the Marantz Stereo 70. This stereo receiver is stylistically very similar to the stereo integrateds from Marantz, like the Model 30 and 40N. It produces 75 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 100 watts into 6 using a Class AB style amplifier. If the internal power isn't enough for you, you can put the 70 into a strict preamp only mode and use its dedicated preamp outs to connect to a separate, more powerful third-party amplifier. Throw in 2 sub-outs, which are sadly not independent, and you can create a 2.1 stereo and home theater system around the Stereo 70. And yes, you heard me right, stereo and home theater, because the 70 has 6 HDMI inputs, 3 of which support signals up to 8K 60 and 4K 120, something you're not going to find on any HDMI-equipped smart speaker, at least none that I'm aware of. Along with HDMI switching, the 70 can upscale HD all the way to 8K depending on your settings. Its monitor out-in also supports ARC and CEC for easy connection and control over your HDMI connected TV. While the Stereo 70 may not support multi-channel audio codecs like Dolby Atmos, it does support HDR codecs like Dolby Vision, as well as gaming features like ALLM, VRR, and quick frame transport. Again, something you're not going to find on existing smart speakers. Toss in a built-in DAC, music streaming through HEOS, Bluetooth, AirPlay 2, and smart home support from Alexa, Google Assistant, and Apple's HomePod, and you can start to see how the 70 does more than your typical smart speaker. Oh, and I almost forgot, it also has a built-in moving magnet phono preamp, which is actually pretty good. While I could have easily created a system around the Stereo 70 with budget as my sole focus, in order to, put comparable smart speakers to shame, I used 2 of my favorite obtainable speakers. Our reigning budget-friendly king, the Polk R700 Towers, and Sonus Faber's ultra-stylish Lumina 2s. Building an all-in stereo setup around these 2 speakers will run you between $2,000 and $3,000. And if the Stereo 70 can drive these speakers to their fullest potential, then it should have no problems with lower-priced speakers if you need to bring the total cost of ownership down a bit. To test our system, we used 2 different TVs, the Sony X95L and the Hisense 85UX. Be sure to watch our review of the Hisense to see why you should skip that pairing. Our Apple TV 4K, Sony PS5, Audio-Technica LP140 XP turntable with the Ortofon 2M black cartridge also played important roles in this review. Emotiva's BassX A2 was used to bring additional power to the party, and lastly, our Klipsch RP1000 subwoofer was used to test the 70 sub out and internal bass management. With the exception of the Hisense, our test subjects all proved to be great pairings with the Marantz. And once you have everything connected, I think you're going to be happily surprised to see the same high-quality on-screen menus that you're going to find on all of Marantz's AV receivers, only now it's in the 70. The on-screen menus make setup a breeze, but if you decide not to connect the 70 to your TV, you can still use the app. And the app is a lot easier to use than that small style display that the Marantz has. All 3 setup methods are possible, but if I had to rank them, I'm going to go TV, app, then the display on the unit. Getting things up and running is easy, but sadly there is no auto setup or room EQ with the Stereo 70. You get full control over tone and balance, but there is no room EQ. If you want basic room correction, you're going to need to step up to the Marantz Cinema 70 AV receiver. Still, for a so-called hi-fi product, I challenge you to find one as user-friendly as the Stereo 70. Now, to see just how the 70 worked on more challenging speakers, I started with the Polk R700s. Knock me over with a feather. The Marantz did really, really well. Maybe not the best that I've heard, but far from the worst. The 70 had no problems driving the Polks to loud volumes without strain, and even in our large room, and regardless of what I chose to listen to. Now, where I think you're going to notice a difference between the 70 and a more traditional or dedicated stereo rig is in the bass. The Marantz easily managed the Polk's lower octaves, but it pulled up just short of having that exacting control over the speaker's two 8-inch woofers. The bass could at times seem a little boomy or vague. It was deep, just not quite as nuanced, and this was observable during listening sessions of Everloving, The Noose, Anna Begins, and December. Now, did it get in the way of my enjoyment? No, but when I added the Emotiva Bass X A2, the gains in low bass control, they were noticeable, and I would consider the investment in a dedicated amp like the Emotiva worth it in the long term. That said, from the mid-range on up, I think you're going to be hard-pressed to tell the 70 from the costlier Model 40N, not only tonally, but in the overall sensation of detail. The 40N's top end is more refined, airier even, but keep the volume below 85 dB in room, and I doubt you're going to hear much difference. Now, when it comes to soundstage definition, separation, and scale, the Model 40N is better than the 70, but dynamically speaking, the Delta, at least with the Polks, it didn't strike me as that night and day different. Pairing a smaller, less demanding speaker like the Lumina 2s to the Stereo 70 may make you question the need for more. Marantz drove the Luminas beautifully, giving me all of the performance and sound quality that I know to exist with these speakers without spending a fortune. Add in a subwoofer, again we used our Klipsch RP sub, and I'm confident that you will be more than satisfied. The Stereo 70, like many Marantz amps and receivers before it, it's just so easy to listen to regardless of your taste in music or recording quality. While not as exacting as Yamaha, or maybe not as well dampened or controlled as Audiolab's costlier integrateds, the Stereo 70 falls somewhere in the middle. It doesn't restrict your speaker soundstage or dynamic prowess, and also works for movies and gaming. At this price point, you can start to see how the 70 could be a problem for the powered speaker market. Now that we've tackled sound, let's focus on the 70's HDMI connectivity, switching, and upscaling. The Stereo 70 worked brilliantly with my PS5. Even next-gen games pushing 120 frames per second were no problem for the Marantz, which is something you can't even get into when discussing the costlier Yamaha 1000A, Audiolab 7000A, or Technics GX70, despite all of those amps having HDMI. The multiple HDMI inputs on the Stereo 70, along with multiple digital inputs, make it so flexible for the modern enthusiast in ways that traditionalists just don't understand. As for the phono preamp, I don't think it's different from the one used in the Cinema 70. I like it. To me, they sounded more or less the same when paired with my Audio-Technica and Ortofon cartridge. Is it as good as what you're going to get with the Technics GX70 or Audiolab 7000A? No. It's definitely closer to what you're going to find in the Yamaha 1000A though. If you're rocking a U-turn or similar table with a cartridge to match, go ahead, use the built-in phono preamp inside the 70, but if your needs and appreciation of vinyl change, you can add a third-party phono preamp to one of the Stereo 70's analog audio inputs. Our work schedule, it's jam-packed. Finding time to make healthy meals is practically impossible. With Factor, we've been able to cut down on grocery trips and meal prep, and it's been a huge time saver. Now, we never miss a video, which is why I am so excited to have them as today's sponsor. And you can try them too by using our code AndrewRobinson50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. But Factor, it's not just for lunch. They have breakfast items like apple cinnamon pancakes and bacon and cheddar egg bites. Your meals are delivered fresh, never frozen to your door. Just heat, eat, and enjoy. Or for an easy wellness boost, try their cold-pressed juices, shakes, and smoothies. Factor offers keto, calorie smart, chef's choice, and vegan and veggie options, which include seafood, meat, and plant-based meals. They make meeting your health goals so much easier. Their registered dietitians work hand in hand with their kitchen to ensure that every meal is made from scratch with nutritious ingredients. And when you're craving something special, Factor offers Gourmet Plus meals anytime you want to mix things up. Head on over to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code AndrewRobinson50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Now, back to the video. Now, compared to integrated amps with similar specs, the Stereo 70, it may not best the GX70 from Technics, nor does it wholly upset the Yamaha 1000A or Audiolab 7000A, but all things considered, it's always in the conversation. But when it comes to value for money, it is the best option, hands down. If the Stereo 70 had even rudimentary room correction, it would be the no-brainer. Just get it and forget it choice for, I'm guessing, 90% of you watching this. As for the Marantz Model 40N, at 2.5 times the price, the 40N is the superior product. It's better built, it sounds better, and it is more refined. The 40N has an easier time driving more difficult speakers like the R700s, despite having similar power ratings to the Stereo 70. If you already own a 40N and are happy with it, rest assured you have the better product. But if you've been eyeing the 40N but can't justify its asking price, or you just want more HDMI connectivity and you know your speakers aren't pigs like the R700s, I think you're going to be totally fine with the Stereo 70. As for powered speakers like the 7s or the 9s, or other options like KEF Wireless 2s, forget the LS60 Metas, the Stereo 70 may make more sense. From a functional standpoint, the Marantz plus a pair of, say, Polk R200 bookshelf speakers will cost about the same while also giving you a lot more flexibility for the future. Never mind the fact that investing in the 70 gives you more freedom when it comes to speaker choices, because you're only going to be out the price of speakers versus, say, an entire system should something go wrong, or maybe your needs just change. Prior to the Stereo 70's arrival on the market, smart powered speakers costing anywhere between, say, $800 and $2,000 a pair had their place. But given everything that you get with the Marantz, the passive versus, powered decision, it starts to get a little harder. Now, I don't know if Marantz set out to be a disruptor and upend the powered speaker market, but that is exactly what they've done with the launch of the Stereo 70. While you can spend more on better sounding integrated amps, spending more doesn't always mean that you will end up with more features and flexibility. So you have to ask yourself, what's more valuable to you? A true all-in-one stereo receiver that costs less than the competition, or a stereo receiver or integrated that may sound marginally better, but may ask you to make sacrifices elsewhere? I can't make that call for you. Suffice to say, Marantz has done a lot more than just make another new product in the Stereo 70. So that's enough out of me and what I think of Marantz's new Stereo 70. But before we get out of here, what do you think?
Well, first I just want to say that I'm such a big fan of what Marantz has been doing lately.
Yeah.
Marantz is putting out some of my favorite amplifiers and receivers. They really rank right up there. And for $1,000, I think this is a really, really great option.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I wholeheartedly agree with your theory about this destroying the powered speaker market.
It could.
It could. I mean, it's a fun thought experiment. For me, I see the powered speaker customer being a completely different type of user than one who's going to go all in on a traditional system.
Sure.
I think a powered speaker buyer has a lot more in common with someone who might also consider a soundbar.
Sure.
I feel like they're way more closely related, which leads me to ask your thoughts about going with this over something like a soundbar, because you could get, say, like the Bose Ultra soundbar that we just reviewed. It does all pretty much all the things that you mentioned that the Stereo 70 can do. Let's just talk about maybe something like the Bose, or maybe a pair of the Era 300s.
Look, if you want to cut down on boxes, devices, call it cable clutter, obviously potentially going with a soundbar smart speaker like the Bose that you mentioned or the Era 300s will do that. But they are more flexible in the sensation of surround sound. So if that's important to you for movie watching and you want a little bit more of a home theater experience from as few speakers as possible, then yes, you need to look at that or consider options like that. However, if you're looking for greater flexibility, for example, the Bose, while being a more home theater centric product that does sound good with stereo music, you cannot plug gaming consoles into it. It does not have multiple HDMI inputs for switching, so you are running all of those cables to your television, which may not be a bad thing and may not be a deal breaker. But if you're like us and your TV maybe is on the wall and you don't want to look at cables running down your wall and all of that, being able to set something on a table or a console and have other things plugged into it is kind of clean. It's kind of clean. As for connecting other devices to it, obviously you have no HDMI with the Sonos Era 300s, and you are very limited on what you can connect to it, even analog, including if you have a turntable with a built-in phono preamp. You got to be careful. You got to make sure that you buy the right dongle with that product in order to allow it to work, unless, of course, you have a Bluetooth-enabled turntable.
I have a feeling that some of our viewers are going to ask about, well, what about, say, the Bowers and Wilkins Formation Duos, which they could be cross-shopped against something like this. Like if you're deciding, like, do I want all the boxes or do I want just a really good sounding speaker?
They're fantastic, and it's definitely an audiophile powered speaker, if you will. They are a little bit limited in that they're fantastic if you can get by with what is offered in the speaker itself. But you have to understand with that speaker, and we talked about this in the review from like 3 years ago, if you have a turntable and you're like, you know what, I want to connect to it, or you have a CD player, now I want to connect to it, you have to get a separate box for the Formation Duos, and it's kind of a hub. And you plug everything into that, and then the hub speaks to the speakers. And so in that instance, you kind of have a receiver in the middle, despite the speakers being wireless. And so in that way, it suddenly becomes not too much different from the Stereo 70 and, say, a pair of Bowers & Wilkins 701 S3s, which will be less money than the Formation Duos.
Okay, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I had forgotten about
The hub?
the hub.
Everyone does.
Well, I think that they might get an update soon. So
Hopefully.
well,
I
it'll be
would
interesting
love.
to see what they do with that.
Yeah.
Okay, moving back to the Stereo 70, I want to give you my quick thoughts on this product versus the Yamaha 1000A.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
So for me, I prefer the Yamaha over the Stereo 70, but I do realize it does cost about $700 more
Yes.
to go with the 1000A.
Yes.
But I do like that you get a little bit more power with it. I think it does a better job at controlling the bass
Yes.
as a result. But I mean, obviously, if you don't have speakers like the R700, I think the Stereo 70 is more than enough to suit your needs. And just want to give a quick shout out to the Lumina 2s. They sounded really good on the Marantz Stereo 70. And every time we connect those back out into our living room, I'm like, damn, those speakers are good.
That is why we kept those.
Yeah, that's why we kept those things. No, they're so good.
Yeah.
And so I can make a case for both of these products. But I think long term, especially if you have any concerns about, well, maybe your speakers might change over time to something a little more difficult to challenge, I think having 100 watts into 8 ohms with the Yamaha is going to pay dividends long term.
Yeah, I will agree. The 1000A, to use a car analogy, puts the power down just a little bit more confidently, especially with bigger tower speakers, for sure.
And just lastly, I know that you mentioned this briefly,
Okay.
but I do feel that people are going to want you to go into a little more detail about how the Stereo 70 compares to the Cinema 70
Receiver.
receiver. Yes, I know the Cinema 70 is an AV receiver,
Yeah.
but considering the Cinema 70 is only about $200 more
Yes.
than the Stereo 70, why do you think someone would buy one over the other, and which one would you opt
All right.
for?
We'll Pulp Fiction it. We'll start at the end. Totally upending the entire review. If it were me, I would buy the Cinema 70 AV receiver. And I would do that for 2 reasons. One, it's not that much more expensive than the Stereo 70, and it leaves the door open for experimentation into the multi-channel realm, aka even more home theater, if you will. Including 3.1 or 3.2 if you didn't want to even do surrounds, and that's something the Stereo 70 can't do. Now, the Cinema 70 should not be paired necessarily right out of the gate with speakers like the R700, in my opinion. It is less powerful than the Stereo 70. And the more channels you add to the Cinema 70, the less power it produces, making it not a great fit for hard to drive speakers. But it has that strict preamp mode, has full preamp outs like we discussed in that review. So you can add a third-party amplifier like a Bass-X, A2, A3, A4, A5, whatever, and solve that problem and still come in cheaper than a lot of comparable receivers power-wise. And so that is why the Cinema 70 is arguably one of the most important products Marantz released this year. If you know for a fact, you're like, yeah, I do want to connect it to a TV because I like watching TV shows and movies with a better sound than what's in the TV speakers, but I have no desire to go beyond that, then yes, you are a candidate for the Stereo 70. Or if you're just like, I'm more of a hi-fi guy and I'm not really sure if I'm going to connect a TV to anything, but it's nice to have that option, then you should also look at the Stereo 70. But for me, if I'm talking maximum long-term flexibility, not knowing what my needs may be today versus tomorrow or a year from now, I do think the Cinema 70 at like $200 more is actually the better longest-term investment, unless, of course, you just know that's like, I'm not doing that. And then Stereo 70 all the way. All right, guys, that is now our review of Marantz's fabulous Stereo 70. Now it's your turn to tell us what you think. What do you think of my theory? You think the Stereo 70 could be a disruptor to the powered speaker market? Do you think people making powered speakers right now are like, ooh, wish we would have thought of that?
Or do you totally agree with me?
Or do you totally agree with Christy? Either way, let us know down in the comments below. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Christy's left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you've continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And we both thank you all for doing that. Speaking of thanks, thank you to Factor to get 50% off your first Factor box. Go ahead, click the link in the description. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next video.